It says I'm live, but I cannot see myself, and I cannot see you. There's a picture. Oh, there we go. I believe we're up and at 'em. Welcome to my channel. I am so glad to have you here. I apologize for the slight delay. We had some technical difficulties, and since I'm not the most computer literate person, it was rather difficult. Hello everyone who is just joining me. My name is Richard Lale, as one name, so that is what I like to be called. But welcome, my friends. I am so excited. I've read this book before. I've actually read it many times. Once live before on my Facebook. It was very popular. And I decided that you, my friends, my public, would like to hear it. And so to promote literacy, here we are. I have been accused on numerous occasions of being a live-action role player. Well, there is nothing wrong with a little pretend. So, if you'll pardon me for just a moment, I'm going to show you my version of the Baron himself. Baron Munchausen, who is ready for his story. All right, well, here we go. Now, this book is very old. It says Clyde Dillon, October 4th, 1899. But the book is much older than that. You can see it's very old and it's very fragile. But books were made to be read, rather. Here we go. To the public. Having heard for the first time that my adventures have been doubted and looked upon as jokes, I feel bound to come forward and vindicate my character for veracity by paying 3 shillings at the mansion house of this great city for the affidavits hereto appended. This I have been forced into in regard of my own honour, although I have retired for many years from public and private life, and I hope that this is my last edition, will place me in a proper light with my readers. At the city of London, England, we, the undersigned, as true believers in the Prophet, do most solemnly affirm that all the adventures of our friend Baron Munchausen, in whatever country they may lie, are positive and simple facts, and, as we have been believed, whose adventures are tenfold more wonderful, so do we hope all true believers will give him their full faith and credence. Gulliver, Sinbad, and Aladdin. The Travels of Baron Munchausen, Chapter 1. Some years before my beard announced approaching manhood, or, in other words, when I was neither man nor boy, but between both, I expressed in repeated conversations a strong desire of seeing the world, from which I was discouraged by my parents, through my father had been no inconsiderable traveller himself. As will appear before, I have reached the end of my singular, and I may add, interesting adventures. A cousin, by my mother's side, took a liking to me, often said I was a fine forward youth, and was much inclined to gratify my curiosity. His eloquence had more effect than mine, for my father consented to my accompanying him in a voyage to the island of Célion, where his uncle has resided as governor many years. We sailed from Amsterdam with dispatches from their high mightiness the state of Holland. The only circumstance which happened in our voyage worth relating was the wonderful effects of a storm which had torn up by the roots a great number of trees of enormous bulk and height, in an island where we lay at anchor to take in wood and water. Some of these trees weighed many tons, yet they were carried by the wind so amazingly high that they appeared like feathers of small birds floating in the air. For they were at least 5 miles above the earth, however. As soon as the storm subsided, they all fell perpendicularly into their respective places and took root again, except the largest, which happened when it was blown into the air to have a man and his wife, a very honest old couple, upon its branches, gathering cucumbers. In this part of the globe that useful vegetable grows upon trees. The weight this couple, as the tree descended, overbalanced the trunk and brought it down in a horizontal position. It fell in the chief men of the island and killed him on the spot. He had quitted his house in the storm under the apprehension of its falling upon him, and was returning through his own garden when his fortunate accident happened. The word fortunate here requires some explanation. This chief was a man of a very avaricious and oppressive disposition, and though he had no family, the natives of the island were half starved by his oppressive and infamous impositions. The very goods which he had thus taken from them were spoiling in the stores, while the poor wretches from whom they were plundered were pining in poverty. Though the destruction of this tyrant was accidental, the people chose the cucumber gatherers for their governors, as a mark of their gratitude for destroying, though accidentally, their late tyrant. After we had repaired the damages we sustained in this remarkable storm, and taken leave of the new governor and his lady, we sailed with a fair wind in the object of our voyage. In about 6 weeks we arrived at Célion, where we were received with great marks of friendship and true politeness. The following singular adventure may not prove unentertaining. After we had resided at Célion for about a fortnight, I accompanied one of the governor's brothers upon a shooting party. He was a strong, athletic man, and being used to that climate, for he had resided there some years, he bore the violent heat of the sun much better than I could. In our excursion, he had made a considerable progress through a thick wood when I was only at the entrance. Near the banks of the large piece of water which had engaged my attention, I thought I heard a rustling noise behind. On turning about, I was almost petrified, as who would not, at the sight of a lion, which was evidently approaching with intention of satisfying his appetite with my poor carcass, and that without asking my consent. What was to be done in this horrible dilemma? I had not even a moment for reflection, my piece-wax only charged with swan-shot, and I had no other about me. However, I could have no idea of killing such an animal with that weak kind of ammunition, yet I had some hopes of frightening him by the report, and perhaps of wounding him also. I immediately let fly, without waiting, till he was within reach, and the report did but enrage him, for he now quickened his pace, and seemed to approach me full speed. I attempted to escape, but that only added, if an addition could be made, to my distress. For the moment I turned about, I found a large crocodile with his mouth extended, almost ready to receive me. On my right hand was the piece of water before mentioned. and on my left a deep precipice, said to have, as I have since learned, a receptacle at the bottom for venomous creatures. In short, I gave myself up as lost, for the lion was now upon his hind legs, just in the act of seizing me. I fell involuntarily to the ground with fear, and, as it afterwards appeared, he sprang over me. I lay some time in the situation which no language can describe, expecting to feel his teeth or the talons in some part of me at every moment. After waiting in this prostrate situation for a few seconds, I heard a violent but unusual noise, different from any sound that had ever before assailed my ears. Nor is it at alley to be wondered at when I inform you from whence it proceeded. After listening for some time, I ventured to raise my head and look round, when to my unspeakable joy I perceived the lion had, by the eagerness with which he sprung at me, jumped forward as I fell into the crocodile's mouth, which, as before observed, was wide open. The head of the one stuck in the throat of the other, and they were struggling to extricate themselves. I fortunately recollected my couteau de champ, which was by my side. With this instrument I severed the lion's head at one blow, and the body fell at my feet. I then, with the butt end of my fowling piece, rammed the head further into the throat of the crocodile and destroyed him by suffocation, for he could neither gorge nor eject it. Soon after I had thus gained a complete victory over my two powerful adversaries, my companion arrived in search of me. For finding I did not follow him into the wood, he returned apprehending I had lost my way or met with some dreadful accident. After mutual congratulations, we measured the crocodile, which was just 40 feet in length. As soon as we had related this extraordinary adventure to the governor, he sent a wagon and servants, who brought home 2 carcasses. The lion's skin was properly preserved with its hair on, after which it was made into tobacco pouches and presented by me upon our return to Holland to the burgomaster, who in return requested my acceptance of 1,000 ducats. The skin of the crocodile was stuffed in the usual manner, and makes a capital article in their public museum at Amsterdam, where the exhibitor relates the whole story to each spectator with such additions as he thinks proper. Some of his variations are rather extravagant. One of them is that the lion jumped quite through the crocodile and was making his escape at the back door, when, as soon as his head appeared, Monsieur, the great baron, as he is pleased to call me, cut it off, and 3 feet of the crocodile's tail along with it. May so little attention has this fellow to the truth that he sometimes adds, as soon as the crocodile missed his tail, he turned about, snatched the couteau du chat out of Monsieur's hand, and swallowed it with such eagerness that it pierced his heart and killed him immediately. The little regard which this impudent knave has to veracity makes me sometimes apprehensive that my real facts may fall under suspicion by being found in the company with his confounded inventions. Chapter 2. Set off from Rome on journey to Russia, in the midst of winter, from just notion that the frost and snow must, of course, mend the roads which every traveller had described as uncommonly bad through the northern parts of Germany, Poland, Courland, Livonia. I went on horseback as the most convenient manner of travelling. I was lightly clothed, and of this I felt inconvenience the more I advanced northeast. What must not a poor old man have suffered in that severe weather and climate, whom I saw on a bleak common in Poland, lying on the road, helpless, shivering, and hardly having withal to cover his nakedness. I pitied the poor soul, though I felt the severity of the air myself. I threw my mantle over him, and immediately I heard a voice from the heavens, blessing me for that piece of charity, saying, "You will be rewarded, my son, for this in time." I went on. Night and darkness overtook me. No village was to be seen. The country was covered with snow, and I was unacquainted with the road. Tired, I alighted and fastened my horse to something, like a pointed stump of a tree, which appeared above the snow. For the sake of safety, I placed my pistols under my arm and laid down in the snow, where I slept so soundly that I did not open my eyes till full daylight. It is not easy to conceive my astonishment to find myself in the midst of a village lying in a churchyard, nor was my horse to be seen, but I heard him soon after neigh somewhere above me. On looking upwards, I beheld him hanging by his bridle to the weathercock of the steeple. Matters were now very plain to me. The village had been covered with snow overnight, and sudden change of weather had taken place, and I had sunk down to the churchyard while asleep, gently in the same proportion as the snow had melted away, and what in the dark I had taken to be a stump of a little tree appearing above the snow, to which I had tied my horse, proved to have been the cross or weathercock of the steeple. Without long consideration, I took one of my pistols, shot the bridle in two, brought down the horse, and proceeded on my journey. Here the Baron seems to have forgot his feelings. He should certainly have ordered his horse to feed of corn after fasting so long. He carried me well. Advancing into the interior parts of Russia, I found travelling on horseback rather unfashionable in winter. Therefore, I submitted, as I always do, to the custom of the country, took a single horse sledge, and drove briskly toward St. Petersburg. I do not exactly recollect whether it was in Eastland or in Junglemanland, but I remember that in the midst of a dreary forest I spied a terrible wolf making after me with all the speed of ravenous winter hunger. He soon overtook me. There was no possibility of escape. Mechanically, I laid myself down flat in the sledge and let my horse run for safety. I wished but hardly hoped or expected happened. Immediately after, the wolf did not mind me in the least, but took the leap over me, and falling furiously on the horse, began instantly to tear and devour the hind part of the poor animal, which ran the faster for his pain and terror. Thus unnoticed and safe myself, I lifted my head slyly up, and with horror I beheld that the wolf had ate his way into the horse's body. It was not long before he had fairly forced himself into it, when I took my advantage and fell upon him with the butt end of my whip. This unexpected attack in his rear frightened him so much that he leaped forward with all his might. The horse's carcass dropped on the ground, but in his place the wolf was in the harness, and I, on my part, whipping him continually. We both arrived in full career safe to St. Petersburg, contrary to our respective expectations, and very much to the astonishment of the spectators. I shall not tire you, gentlemen, with the politics, arts, sciences, and history of this magnificent metropolis of Russia, nor trouble you with various intrigues and pleasant adventures I had in politer circles of that country, where the lady of the house always receives the visitor with a dram and a salute. I shall confine myself rather to the greater and nobler objects of your attention, Horses and dogs, my favourites in the brute creation, also to foxes, wolves, and bears, with which, and game in general Russia abounds more than any other part of the world, and to such sports, manly exercises, and feats of gallantry and activity, as show the gentleman better than musty Greek or Latin, or all the perfume, finery, and capers of French wits, or the petit maître. It was some time before I could obtain a commission in the army, and for several months I was perfectly at liberty to sport away my time and money in the most gentlemanlike manner. You may easily imagine that I spent much of both out of town, and such gallant fellows as knew how to make the most of an open forest country. The very recollection of those amusements gives me fresh spirits and creates a warm wish for repetition of them. One morning I saw through the windows of my bedroom that large pond, not far off, was covered with wild ducks. In an instant I took my gun from the corner, ran downstairs, and out of the house in such a hurry that I imprudently struck my face against the doorpost. Fire flew out of my eyes, but it did not prevent my intention. I soon came within shot. When levelling my piece, I observed to my sorrow that even the flint had sprung from the cock by the violence of the shock I had just received. There was no time to be lost. I presently remembered the effect it had on my eyes, therefore opened the pan, levelled the piece against the wild fowls, and my fist against one of my eyes. The Baron's eyes have retained fire ever since, and appear particularly illuminated when he relates this anecdote. A hearty blow drew sparks again. The shot went off, and I killed 50 brace of ducks, 20 widgeons, and 3 couple of teals. Presence of mind is the soul of manly exercises. If soldiers and sailors owe it to many of their lucky escapes, hunters and sportsmen are not less beholden to it for many of their successes. In a noble forest in Russia, I met a fine black fox, whose valuable skin it would have been a pity to tear by a ball or shot. Reynard stood close to a tree. In a twinkling I took out my ball and placed a good spike nail in its room, fired, and hit him so cleverly that the nail nailed his brush fast to the tree. I now went up to him, took out my hanger, gave him a cross-cut over the face, laid hold of my whip, and fairly flogged him out of his fine skin. Chance and good luck often correct our mistakes. Of this I had a singular instance soon after, when, in the depth of the forest, I saw a wild pig and sow running close behind each other. My ball had missed them, yet the foremost pig only ran away, and the sow stood motionless, as fixed to the ground. On examining into the matter, I found the latter one to be an old sow, blind with age, which had taken hold of her pig's tail in order to be led among by filful duty. My ball, having passed between the two, had cut his leading string, which the old sow continued to hold in her mouth, and as her former guide did not draw her any longer, she had stopped, of course. I therefore laid hold of the remaining end of the pig's tail, and led the old beast home without any further trouble on my part, and without any reluctance or apprehension on the part of the helpless old animal. Terrible as these wild sows are, yet more fierce and dangerous are the boars, one of which I had once the misfortune to meet in a forest, unprepared for attack or defence. I retired behind an oak tree, just when the furious animal levelled a side blow at me, with such force that his tusks pierced through the tree, by which means he could neither repeat the blow nor retire. Ho, ho, thought I shall soon have you now. and immediately I laid hold of a stone, wherewith I hammered and bent his tusks in such a manner that he could not retreat by any means, and must wait my return to the next village, whither I went for ropes and a cart to see. Some of these words, my friends, are the ink is worn away. To a cart to secure him properly, and to carry him off safe and sound, in which I perfectly succeeded. Chapter 4. You have heard, I dare say, of the hunter's and the sportsman's saint and protector, Saint Hubert, and of the noble stag which appeared to him in the forest with the holy cross between his antlers. I have paid my homage to that saint every year in good fellowship, and seeing this stag 1,000 times, either painted in churches or embroidered in the stars of his knights, so that upon the honour and the conscience of good sportsmen, I hardly know whether there may not have been formerly, or whether there are not such crossed stags even this present day. But let me rather tell what I have seen myself. Having one day spent all my shot, I found myself unexpectedly in the presence of a stately stag, looking at me as unconcernedly as if he had known of my empty pouches. I charged immediately with powder, and upon it a good handful of cherry stones, for I had sucked the fruit as far as the hurry would permit. Thus I let fly at him, and hit him just on the middle of the forehead, between his antlers. It stunned him. He staggered, yet he made off. A year or two after, being with a party of in the same forest, I beheld a noble stag with a fine, full-grown cherry tree above 10 feet high between his antlers. I immediately recollected my former adventure, looked upon him as my property, and brought him to the ground by one shot, which at once gave me the haunch and cherry sauce, for the tree was covered with the richest fruit, the like I had never tasted before. Who knows but some passionate holy sportsman or sporting abbot or bishop may have shot, planted, and fixed the cross between the antlers of St. Hubert's stag in a manner similar to this. They have always been, and still are, famous for plantations of crosses and antlers, and in the case of distress or dilemma, which too often happens to keen sportsmen, and one is apt to grasp at anything for safety, and to try any expedient rather than miss the favourable opportunity, I have many times found myself in that trying situation. What do you say of this, for example? Daylight and powder was spent one day in a Polish forest. When I was going home, a terrible bear made up to me in great speed, with open mouth ready to fall upon me. All of my pockets were searched in the instant for powder and ball, but in vain. I found nothing but 2 spare flints. One I flung with all my might into the monster's open jaws, down his throat. It gave him pain and made him turn about, so that I could level the second at the back door, which indeed I did with wonderful success. For it flew in, met the first flint in the stomach, struck fire, and blew up the bear with a terrible explosion. Though I came off safe that time, yet I should not wish to try that again, or venture against bears with no other ammunition. There is a kind of fatality in it. The fiercest and most dangerous animals generally came upon when the defenceless, as if they had a notion or an instinctive intimation of it. Thus a frightful wolf rushed upon me so suddenly and so close that I could do nothing but follow mechanical instinct, and thrust my fist into his open mouth. For safety's sake, I pushed on, till my arm was fairly in up to the shoulder. How I should disengage myself, I was not much pleased with my awkward situation. With Wolf face to face, or our oogling was not of the most pleasant kind. If I withdrew my arm, then the animal would fly in the more furiously upon me. Then I saw in his flaming eyes, in short, I laid hold of his tail, turned him inside out like a glove, and flung him to the ground where I left him. The same expedient would not have answered against a mad dog, which soon after came running against me in the narrow street at St. Petersburg. Run, who can, I thought, and to do this the better. I threw off my fur cloak, and was safe within the doors in an instant. I sent my servant for the cloak, and he put it in the wardrobe with my other clothes. The day after I was amazed and frightened by Jack's bawling, "For God's sake, sir, your fur cloak is mad!" I hastened up to him and found almost all of my clothes tossed about and torn to pieces. The fellow was perfectly right in his apprehensions about the fur cloak's madness. I saw him myself, just then, falling upon a fine full dress suit, which he shook and tossed in an unmerciful manner. Chapter 5. All these narrow and lucky escapes, gentlemen, were chances turned to advantage by presence of mind and vigorous exertions, which taken together, as everybody knows, makes the fortunate sportsman sailor and soldier. But he would be very blamable and imprudent sportsman, admiral or general, who would always depend upon chance and his stars without troubling himself about those arts which are their particular pursuits, and without providing the very best implements which ensure successes. I was not blamable either way, for I have always been as remarkable for the excellency of my horses, dogs, guns, and swords, as for the proper manner of using and managing them, so that upon the whole I may hope to be remembered in the forest, upon the turf, and in the field. I shall not enter here into any detail of the stables, kennel, or armoury. But the favourite bitch of mine I cannot help mentioning to you. She was a greyhound, and I never had or saw a better. She grew old in my service, and was not remarkable for her size, but rather for her uncommon swiftness. I always coursed with her. Had you seen her, you must have admired her, and would not have wondered at my predilection and at my coursing with her. She ran so fast, so much, and so long in my service, that she actually ran off her legs, so that in the latter part of her life I was under the necessity of working and using her only as a terrier, in which quality she still served me many years. Coursing one day a hare, which appeared to me uncommonly big, I pitied my poor bitch, being big with pups, yet she would course as fast as ever. I could follow her on horseback only at great distance. At once I heard a cry, as it were a pack of hounds, but so weak and faint that I hardly knew what to make of it. Coming up to them, I was greatly surprised. The hare had littered in running, the same had happened to my bitch in coursing, and there was just as many leverets as there were pups. By instinct, the former ran and the latter coursed, and thus I found myself in possession of 6 hares and as many dogs at the end of the course, which had only begun with 1. I remember this, my wonderful bitch, with the same pleasure and tenderness as a superb Lithuanian horse, which no money could have bought. He became mine by accident, which gave me an opportunity of showing my horsemanship to great advantage. I was at Count Prozboski's noble country seat in Lithuania, and remained with the ladies at tea in the drawing-room, while the gentlemen were down in the yard to see a young horse of blood which had just arrived from the stud. We suddenly heard a noise of distress, I hastened downstairs and found the horse so unruly that nobody durst approach nor mount him. The most resolute horseman stood dismayed and aghast. Despondency was expressed in every countenance, when, in one leap, I was on his back, took him by surprise, and worked him quite into gentleness and obedience. With the best display of horsemanship I was master of. Fully to show this to the ladies, and save them the unnecessary trouble, I forced him to leap at once at one of the open windows of the tea-room, walked around several times, pace, trot, and gallop, and at last made him mount the tea-table, there to repeat his lessons in a pretty style of miniature which was exceedingly pleasing to the ladies. For he performed amazingly well, and did not break either cup nor saucer. It placed me so high in their opinions, and so well in that the noble of the lord, that with his usual politeness he begged I would accept of his young horse, and ride him full career to conquest and honour, in the champaign against the Turks, which was soon to be opened under the command of Count Munich. I could not indeed have received a more agreeable present, nor more an ominous one, at the opening of that campaign in which I made my acceptance ship as soldier. A horse so gentle, so spirited, and so fierce, at once a lamb and a Bucephalus, put me always in mind of the soldiers, and the gentleman's duty, of young Alexander, and of astonishing things he performed in the field. We took the field among several other reasons. It seemed with an intention to retire the character of the Russian arms, which had been blemished a little by Tsar Peter's last campaign in Pruth, and this was fully accomplished by several very fatiguing and glorious campaigns under the command of that great general I mentioned before. Modesty forbid individuals to arrogate to themselves great successes or victories, the glory which is generally engrossed by the commander, which is rather awkward, by kings and queens, who never smelt gunpowder, but the field days and the reviews of their troops, never saw field of battle, or any enemy in battle array. Nor do I claim any particular share of glory in the great engagements with the enemy. We did our duty, which, in the patriot soldiers' and gentlemen's language, is very comprehensive word of great honour, meaning, and import, and of which the generality of idle guidances and coffee-house politicians can hardly form any but a very mean and contemptible idea. However, having had the command of body of hussars, I went upon several expeditions with discretionary powers, and the success I then met with is, I think, fairly and only to be placed to my account, and to that of this brave fellows whom I led to the conquest and to victory. We had very hot work once the van of the army, when we drove the Turks into the Oskau. My spirited Lithuanian had almost brought me into a scrape. I had an advanced forepost, and saw the enemy coming against me in the cloud of dust, which left me rather uncertain about their actual numbers and real intentions. To wrap myself up in similar cloud was common prudence, but would not have much advanced my knowledge, or answered the end for which I had been sent out. Therefore, I left my flankers on both wings spread to the right and to the left, and make what dust they could, and I myself led on straight upon the enemy to have nearer sight of them. In this I was gratified, for they stood and fought till, for fear of my flankers, they began to move off rather disorderly. This was the moment to fall upon them with spirit, We broke them entirely, made a terrible havoc among them, and drove them not only back to a walled town in the rear, but even through it, contrary to most sanguine expectations. The swiftness of my Lithuanian enabled me to be foremost in the pursuit, and seeing the enemy fairly flying through the opposite gate, I thought it would be prudent to stop in the marketplace in order the men to rendezvous. I stopped, gentlemen, but judge of my astonishment when in this marketplace I saw not one of my hussars about me. Are they scouring for other streets, or what has become of them? They could not be far off, and must at all events soon join me. In that expectation I walked my panting Lithuanian into a spring in this marketplace, and let him drink. He drank uncommonly, with an eagerness not to be satisfied, but natural enough, for when I looked round for my men, what should I see, gentlemen? The hind part of the poor creature, croup and legs, were missing, as if he had been cut in two, and the water ran out as it came in, without refreshing or doing him any good. How it could have happened was quite a mystery to me, till I returned with him to the town gate. There I saw, when I rushed in pell-mell with the flying enemy, they had dropped the portico, a heavy falling door with sharp spikes at the bottom, let down suddenly to prevent the entrance of an enemy into a fortified town, unperceived by me, which had totally cut off his hind part, that still lay quivering on the outside of the gate. It would have been an irreparable loss had not our farrier contrived to bring both parts together while hot. He sewed them up with sprigs, young shoots of young shoots of laurel that were at hand. The wound healed, and what could not have happened but to so glorious a horse, the sprigs took root in his body, grew up, and formed a bower over time, so that afterwards I could go upon many other expeditions in the shade of my own and my horse's laurels. Chapter 6. I was not always successful. I had the misfortune to be overpowered by numbers, to be made prisoner of war, and, what is worse, but always usual amongst the Turks, to be sold for a slave. The Baron was afterwards in great favour with the Grand Signor, as will appear hereafter. In that state of humiliation, my daily task was not very hard and laborious, but rather singular and irksome. It was to drive the Sultan's bees every morning to their pasture grounds, to attend them all day long, and against night to drive them back to their hives. One evening I missed a bee, and soon observed that 2 bears had fallen upon her to tear her to pieces for the honey she carried. I had nothing like an offensive weapon in my hands but a silver hatchet, which is the badge of the Sultan's gardeners and farmers. I threw it at the robbers with the intention of frightening them away, and set the poor bee at liberty. But by an unlucky turn of my arm, it flew upwards, and continued rising till it reached the moon. How should I recover it? How fetch it down again? I recollected that turkey beans grow very quickly, and run up to astonishing height. I planted one immediately. It grew, and actually fastened itself to one of the moon's horns. I had no more to do now but to climb up by it into the moon, where I safely arrived, and had a troublesome piece of business before I could find my silver hatchet in a place where everything has the brightness of silver. At last, however, I found it in a heap of chaff and chopped straw. I was now for returning, but alas, The heat of the sun had dried up my bean. It was totally useless for my descent, so I fell to work and twisted me a rope of that chopped straw as long and as well as I could make it. This I fastened to one of the moon's horns, and slid down to the end of it. Here I held myself fast with the left hand, and with the hatchet in my right I cut off a long, now useless end of the upper part, which, when tied to the lower end, brought me a good deal lower. This repeated splicing and tying of the rope did not improve its quality or bring me down to the Sultan's farms. I was 4 or 5 miles from earth at least when it broke. I fell to the ground with such amazing violence that I felt myself stunned, and in a hole 9 fathoms deep at least, made by my weight of my body falling from so great a height. I recovered, but knew not how to get out again. However, I dug slopes or steps with my fingernails. The Baron's nails were then of 40 years' growth, and easily accomplished it. Peace was soon after concluded with the Turks, and gaining my liberty I left St. Petersburg at the time of that singular revolution, when the Emperor in his cradle, his mother, the Drake of Brunswick, her father, Field Marshal Munich, and many others were sent to Siberia. The winter was then so uncommonly severe all over Europe that ever since the sun seems to be frostbitten. At my return to this place, I felt on the road greater inconveniences than those I had experienced on my setting out. I travelled post, and finding myself in a narrow lane, bid the postulation give a signal with his horn. That other travellers might not meet us in the narrow passage. I blew with all his might, but his endeavours were in vain. He blew with all of his might. His endeavours were in vain. He could not make the horn sound, which was unaccountable and rather unfortunate. For soon after we found ourselves in the presence of another coach coming the other way. There was no proceeding, however. I got out my carriage, and being pretty strong, placed it, wheels and all, upon my head. I then jumped over the hedge about 9 feet high, which, considering the weight of the coach, was rather difficult, into a field, and came out again by another jump into the road beyond the other carriage. I then went back for the horses, and placing one upon my head and the other under my left arm, by the same means brought them to my coach, put to, and proceeded to an inn at the end of our stage. I should have told you that the horse under my arm was very spirited and not above 4 years old. In making my second spring over the hedge, he expressed great dislike to that violent kind of motion by kicking and snorting. However, I confined his hind legs by putting them into my coat pocket. After we arrived at the inn, my postilion and I refreshed ourselves. He hung his horn on a peg near the kitchen fire. I sat on the other side. Suddenly we heard tring, 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 ting. We looked around, and now found the reason why the postilion had not been able to sound his horn. His tunes were frozen up in the horn, and came out now by thawing, plain enough, and much to the credit of the driver, so that the honest fellow entertained us for some time with a variety of tunes, without putting his mouth to the horn. The King of Prussia's march over the hill and over the dale, with many other favourite tunes at length. The thawing entertainment concluded, as I shall thus short account of my Russian travels. Some travellers are apt to advance more than is perhaps strictly true. If any of the company entertain a doubt of my veracity, I shall only say to such, I pity their want of faith, and must request they will take leave before I begin the second part of my adventures, which are as strictly founded in the fact as those as I have already related. Where are we on time? Right at an hour. So, my friends, we shall continue next week, same time, same channel, for more adventures of Baron Munchausen. Thank you, my darlings, for all of the likes, the comments, and the shares. We are going to do another live stream, more than likely sometime in the month. We'll keep that announced for Q&A. But until then, till next time, my darlings, I hope you enjoyed. Much love to you. Next Tuesday, same bat time, same bat channel.